Ma'am, can you state your name for the record?
Judge Marcia Ellison.
And what are you doing out here this afternoon?
Leaving work. What's this about?
We need you to come down to the station with us.
Excuse me, I'm a federal judge. Whatever you're doing here is illegal.
Ma'am, orders came down from upstairs. We have to detain you.
Then your upstairs is breaking the law. You're going to pay for this.
Turn around for me, please.
Ma'am.
By the end of the day, taxpayers would be on the hook for an $11 million settlement. Not because of a crime, not because of corruption, but because a series of procedural failures transformed a routine intelligence tip into an unlawful detention on the steps of a federal courthouse. This investigative reconstruction is a fictionalized composite based on documented patterns found across real civil rights cases and court rulings. What follows is an analysis of how institutional breakdowns, not individual malice, can produce constitutional violations with devastating financial consequences. The location was a major metropolitan federal courthouse on a clear afternoon in September. Court had adjourned. Among the stream of professionals exiting the building was a magistrate judge with 17 years on the bench. She carried a briefcase. She wore professional attire. She had presided over hundreds of cases involving Fourth Amendment claims, probable cause determinations, and constitutional protections. Within minutes, she would become the subject of those very protections. 3 uniformed officers waited near a patrol vehicle at the base of the courthouse steps. They had been dispatched with instructions to make contact with a federal magistrate in connection with allegations of judicial misconduct and bribery. They were not given a warrant. They were not provided with corroborating evidence. They were told to approach, identify, and detain if necessary. What they were not told was that the allegation originated from an anonymous tip flagged internally as low credibility. The magistrate, a professional with an exemplary record, descended the courthouse steps. The officers approached at 2:49 in the afternoon. Bodycam footage reviewed during the subsequent investigation captured the encounter in detail. The ranking officer requested identification. The magistrate stopped, asked what the contact was about, and identified herself as a sitting federal judge. She asked for clarification. The officers repeated their request and stated they needed to ask questions. The magistrate's response was procedurally precise. She stated that any complaint against her would need to follow proper channels through internal affairs, the inspector general, or judicial conduct authorities. She informed the officers they had no authority to detain her without a warrant or probable cause. The ranking officer replied they were not detaining her, only requesting cooperation. She asked if she was free to leave. An officer responded they would prefer she did not. Under Fourth Amendment jurisprudence, this distinction is critical. A seizure occurs when a reasonable person would not feel free to leave. The magistrate, trained in constitutional analysis, recognized the legal threshold had been crossed. She invoked her Fourth Amendment rights on camera and stated the detention was unlawful. She demanded release. The ranking officer did not comply. He instructed her to step aside. She refused and asked directly if she was under arrest. He stated she was not, but insisted she remain. She repeated that the detention violated constitutional protections and that officers were exposing themselves to personal liability. By 2:53, bystanders had gathered. Phones were raised. Video recording began. The optics were striking. A composed professional in business attire, surrounded by uniformed officers outside a federal courthouse, calmly asserting her rights while the encounter was broadcast in real time. What the officers on scene did not know was the basis for their dispatch. The anonymous tip had been received by the Criminal Intelligence Division at 9:30 that morning. The initial analyst flagged it as low credibility. It lacked specifics, no case numbers, no dates, no corroborating documentation. But it mentioned a federal judge, which escalated the matter to supervisory review. A lieutenant forwarded the information up the chain. A captain authorized field contact. At no point did anyone verify the allegation or consult protocols for engaging federal judicial officers. Established guidelines required coordination with the United States Marshals Service when dealing with sitting judges. In cases involving alleged criminal conduct, coordination with the Federal Bureau of Investigation was mandatory. These protocols exist to prevent jurisdictional conflicts and constitutional violations. They were bypassed entirely. At 3:01, a supervising lieutenant arrived on scene. He had been briefed by dispatch and recognized the situation was problematic. Footage shows him addressing the magistrate by name and acknowledging her position. He explained officers had been instructed to make contact based on information received that morning. The magistrate asked what probable cause existed. The lieutenant admitted the basis was an anonymous tip. She asked if it had been verified. He confirmed it had not. The magistrate informed the lieutenant and the officers that they had detained a federal judicial officer without cause, without a warrant, and without due process. She stated she would file a formal complaint and pursue civil action. At 3:04, she was released. No charges, no arrest, no formal apology. She walked to her vehicle and departed. The officers returned to patrol. The incident appeared to conclude. It had not. If you're interested in more investigative breakdowns of accountability failures, procedural lapses, and civil rights cases, consider subscribing. Understanding how systems break down is the first step toward demanding they function correctly. Within 72 hours, Bodycam footage had been requested through public records laws and released. Legal and law enforcement communities took notice. Media coverage followed. Civil rights organizations called for investigation. The federal judiciary contacted Internal Affairs. 17 days later, a formal internal investigation was launched. Investigators reviewed body cam footage, dispatch recordings, internal communications, and the chain of custody for the intelligence report. What they found was a cascade of failures. The anonymous tip had been flagged as low credibility, but escalated anyway. Supervisors authorized field contact without corroboration. Federal liaison protocols were ignored. Officers were not briefed on judicial protections or informed the allegation was unverified. They were told to make contact and detain if necessary. The internal investigation concluded the detention was unlawful under the Fourth Amendment. The magistrate had been seized without reasonable suspicion or probable cause. The anonymous tip, even if credible, provided no factual basis for a stop. Failure to corroborate before action violated investigative standards. Bypassing federal protocols compounded the error. Continuing the detention after the magistrate invoked her rights elevated it to a civil rights violation. Findings were unambiguous. The 3 officers involved were placed on administrative leave pending disciplinary hearings. The supervising lieutenant received a formal reprimand. The captain who authorized the contact was reassigned. The Intelligence Division lieutenant who forwarded the unverified tip was suspended without pay. Command structure was reorganized. New training protocols were implemented. But consequences extended beyond internal discipline. 6 weeks after the incident, the magistrate filed a federal civil rights lawsuit under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. The complaint named the city, the police department, and individual officers. It alleged unlawful detention, Fourth Amendment violations, deprivation of civil liberties under color of law, and reputational harm. The complaint cited internal investigation findings and included body cam footage as evidence. It sought compensatory damages, punitive damages, and injunctive relief requiring protocol reforms. The city's legal team reviewed the materials. The conclusion was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. Body cam footage showed a federal magistrate clearly invoking constitutional rights and being detained anyway. It showed officers continuing the seizure without legal justification. It showed a supervising officer admitting on camera the contact was based on an unverified tip. From a liability perspective, the case could not be defended. The city's insurance carrier assessed exposure and recommended settlement. Defense analysts estimated trial damages could exceed $10 million given the clear violations and the high-profile nature of the plaintiff. Reputational damage would be significant. Settlement would avoid protracted litigation and continued public scrutiny. 7 months after the incident, parties reached agreement. The city paid $11 million, funded through general liability insurance. The cost would be borne by taxpayers. Individual officers were not required to contribute as they acted within the scope of employment. The settlement included mandatory reforms, constitutional rights training, updated federal engagement protocols, and enhanced intelligence operation oversight. The magistrate released a brief statement. The incident was troubling, not due to personal animosity, but because it represented systemic failure to uphold constitutional protections foundational to law enforcement. She expressed hope mandated reforms would prevent recurrence. She returned to the bench and continued her judicial career. Officer outcomes varied. The ranking sergeant resigned 6 months later. One officer completed retraining and returned to duty with a permanent personnel notation. Another accepted transfer to a different division. The supervising lieutenant retired 2 years later, the reprimand marking his record. The case became a training study nationwide. It was cited in legal briefs, discussed in law schools, and referenced in policy debates on accountability. It demonstrated the cost of acting on unverified information. It illustrated the necessity of procedural safeguards when engaging individuals in positions of public trust. It raised questions about institutional responsibility when failures occur. The $11 million settlement was funded by the city, not those who made decisions leading to the violation. Officers followed orders. Supervisors acted on incomplete information. Command staff bypassed established protocols. At each level, choices seemed reasonable in the moment, but compounded into a constitutional violation with massive consequences. Taxpayers funded the settlement. Public trust absorbed the damage. This reconstruction is not about malicious actors. It examines systemic weakness, the risk of prioritizing action over verification, and the fragility of constitutional protections when institutions move faster than accuracy allows. The magistrate did nothing wrong. She was approached, detained, and questioned without cause. She invoked her rights clearly. She was not released until supervisory intervention occurred. Had she not been a federal magistrate with comprehensive legal knowledge, had she not remained composed under pressure, the outcome may have differed substantially. The footage documents it. A professional on courthouse steps, surrounded by armed officers, asserting constitutional rights while the public recorded. An encounter that should not have occurred. A detention violating the principles officers swore to uphold. A price of $11 million paid not by those responsible for the error, but by the municipality and its residents.
Accountability in such cases is complex. Officers followed orders. Supervisors reacted to allegations deemed serious. Command staff operated under time constraints with incomplete data. But the result was a federal judge unlawfully detained on a public sidewalk because no one verified the intelligence before acting. The failure cost millions. It damaged trust. It undermined credibility. When procedural failures occur, financial liability rarely falls on decision-makers. It falls on taxpayers. When constitutional violations happen, the cost is measured not just in settlements, but in eroded confidence that institutions will protect rights rather than violate them. When systems prioritize speed over accuracy, the expense is calculated in both dollars and the integrity of the rule of law. If this analysis prompted you to consider how authority is exercised, how protections are enforced, and how systems fail despite individuals believing they act correctly, engage with it. Share the breakdown. Demand accountability from institutions exercising power in your community. Subscribe for ongoing investigations into procedural failures, civil rights enforcement, and systemic accountability. Comment below with your perspective on necessary reforms and let us know where you're watching from. The next person detained without cause may lack the knowledge, platform, or resources to challenge the violation. These reconstructions matter because patterns persist until systems change. Stay critical. Stay informed. Demand better.